Air defences over Tehran as fresh blasts are heard across the capital. Officials say over 200 sites in Iran have been hit by Israeli strikes since June the 13th. 3 civilians died after an Israeli missile struck an ambulance, reportedly. 9 Revolutionary Guards were killed in Israeli raids on military bases in Yazd. Air defense systems also engaged targets over northwest Iran with explosions near Tabriz. In response, Iran launched a new wave of missiles at Israel, targeting Ben Gurion Airport and military infrastructure. Officials call it Iran's 20th wave of retaliatory strikes. At least 23 people have been wounded in Israel so far. Tehran's top advisor warned that any country hosting attackers will face retaliation. The Iranian foreign minister is in Moscow for emergency talks. Meanwhile, the IAEA are set to hold a crisis meeting today as fears of wider conflict grow. Meanwhile, France is evacuating its citizens from Israel amid the ongoing conflict. Until now, over 65,000 Israelis have returned home by air, sea and land crossings. Here's what the Israeli Transport Minister, Miri Regev, had to say.
עד היום חזרו ארצה מעל ל-65,000 איש, וזאת על פי נתוני מרשם האוכלוסין. הן חזרו דרך הים, דרך האוויר ודרך המעברים היבשתיים. בתחילת המבצע היו בין 100 ל-150 אלף ישראלים בחול. בואו ניקח את המספר 150 אלף. זאת אומרת שהיום אנחנו עומדים על פחות מ-100 אלף, אנחנו עומדים על 84 אלף ישראלים שנמצאים בחול.
We're now joined by Walter Anderson, political analyst located in the USA, to discuss this further. Walter, given these US strikes yesterday, air warfare between both Iran and Israel has been ongoing after a reported 200 Israeli strikes since June the 13th. What red line would push Iran from missile salvos to all-out war?
Well, they're getting close to that now. The issue with Iran, however, is its defenses have been much weakened. In fact, the reports are that the air over Tehran, in fact, anywhere in Iran, is now open to Israeli attack. And when the Israelis, since the American bombing of the 3 nuclear reactors and research facilities, has only increased, in fact. So it's so far it's not proved to be all that much a major impact. Though there has been, some of the material, the drones and others are getting through, but it's still relatively minor in comparison to what the larger issue that the Israelis have in mind. The important thing about all of this is it's really weakened the Iranian position in the Middle East. It's lost the support of its major client groups, the Hezbollah, Hamas, and even to a certain extent the Houthis in Yemen. And its own defenses have been much weakened. In fact, if reports are true, the Iranian counterattacks are getting weaker and weaker virtually with each one that's involved. My guess is there's still considerable popular reaction in Iran against this regime. We've seen that in the last several years. There have been periodic, breakouts. This can only dramatically impact negatively on the economy of Iran, which means dramatically impact on the lives of people. So the question is, to what extent will this regime, the Iranian regime, react to this? I mean, Trump has held out, as has the NATO allies and others as well, who have taken a pro-U.S. position, that to keep open the door of negotiations. Even though, as you know, the news has related that Trump has raised the possibility of regime change, though not as a goal. The goal is still that the U.S. objective is one: Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Which is actually rather, probably a rather smart way to look at this, because it has support outside of necessarily the pro-U.S. stand. I'm sure if you go into the Persian Gulf states, even though the leaders have sort of sent, messages of, ceasefire and sympathy for Iran publicly, privately, my guess is they're not all that sympathetic because many of them, like Saudi Arabia and others, have had long-standing issues and tensions with Iran. And so, my guess is that they would want, the situation to calm down. Certainly that the Straits of Hormuz not be blocked as the parliamentary commission in Iran has suggested. That would be like shooting itself in the foot. It would only increase the economic issues that Iran faces. Because let's face it, the one area where it's able to get any kind of financial backing is from the sale of its oil and gas.
Yes, and Walter, you briefly mentioned it there about Iran's defences being severely weakened. However, the world awaits Iran's retaliation to yesterday's US strikes. What kind of military capabilities does Iran still have amid this Israeli barrage of attacks?
Well, the barrage of attacks is continuing. And in fact, not only Israeli, but other reports indicate the skies over Iran are virtually open. So the Israelis are picking off one after the other. And the question is whether they begin to move against other targets, which some Israelis have suggested they ought to, because the charges that Iran has focused on civilian targets, whereas the Israelis say that they have focused on military targets, though there's collateral damage in that case as well. And the Israelis could start stepping up, attacks that would severely undermine the Iranian economy, and that would have a political impact within Iran itself.
Yes, and we've seen the Iranian parliament also vote to close the Strait of Hormuz. What financial, economic implications will that have on the international community and on world trade?
Well, it would certainly, in fact, you've seen that already. To a certain extent, gas prices and oil prices have gone up as well. But my guess is Iran cannot afford to do this too much, because it would then lose whatever avenues it had to economic growth and the economy. And most of its economy depends on the sale of oil and gas. It has a lot of that, but that's about all it has. It has, other than that, it doesn't have much that would operate, on the international market. So, even though the Parliamentary Commission has proposed that, whether or not it does that, we'll see if wiser heads prevail in this case. And I think this would be shooting yourself in the foot if they do something like that.
Walter Anderson, thank you very much. You are staying with us. We have another related development. The United Nations Security Council has held an emergency session following the US-led strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, sparking global condemnation and deep divisions among world powers. While the US and Israel defended the strikes as necessary to prevent a nuclear Iran, Russia, China and Pakistan have proposed a resolution demanding an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. This is what both the US and Israel stated.
This operation sought to eliminate a long-standing but rapidly escalating source of global insecurity and to aid our ally Israel in our inherent right of collective self-defense, consistent with the UN Charter. For 40 years, the Iranian government has called for death to America and death to Israel, and posed a constant menace to the peace and security of its neighbors, the United States, and the entire world. Iran has attacked Israel with hundreds of ballistic missiles and through terrorist proxies. For decades, Iran has been responsible for misery and countless deaths across the Middle East.
The United States of America struck Iran's nuclear sites at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. The United States, the leader of the free world, removed the greatest existential threat facing the free world. Just like our Operation Rising Lion, This was not a war of choice. This action was a necessity. It was a righteous act for the United States, for Israel, for the Middle East, and for the world.
Now, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned the region is teetering on the edge of a deadly downward spiral. Rafael Grossi, the IAEA chief, has also expressed hope that diplomacy will find its way. Let's listen in to the UN Secretary General and the IAEA chief.
We need a credible, comprehensive and verifiable solution, one that restores trust, including with full access to inspectors of the IAEA as the United Nations technical authority in this field. The Non-Proliferation Treaty is a cornerstone of international peace and security. Iran must fully respect it. Yeah. And all member states must act in accordance with their obligations under the UN Charter and other rules of international law, including international humanitarian law.
The nuclear non-proliferation regime that has underpinned international security for more than half a century is on the line. The dramatic events in Iran have become even more serious with last night's bombardments and the potential widening of the conflict. We have a window of opportunity to return to dialogue and diplomacy. If that window closes, violence and destruction could reach unthinkable levels, and the global non-proliferation regime, as we know it, could crumble and fall.
Iran accused the US of destroying diplomacy, while America's envoy defended the attack as a measure to protect its citizens and allies. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations had the following to say.
Stays a permanent member of this council, the depositary of the NPT, and the only state that has ever used nuclear weapons, murdering millions in 2 cities, has now once again resorted to illegal force, waged a war against my country under a fabricated and absurd pretext, preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons.